You don't want to get all bent out of shape and, make this the typical stereotype scientific kind of talk. That's not what I'm going to tell you about at all. What we're going to tell you about is how science has feet of clay. It always has had. The scientists themselves will tell you this. And I want to mention some of the feet of clay that are preventing us from already having the science of the next millennium. And if we can get rid of a little bit of the clay, we will have a very startling science of the next 1,000 years, and we'll have it very quickly. So I want to indicate to you, or try to indicate, what the nature of this science is already here. They just will not let it yet be born. That could be born tomorrow morning if we can change the scientific community. Let me characterize the scientific community for you. First of all, it's difficult to learn to be a working scientist. It really is. You got to work hard. You got to learn an awful lot of things, and usually in a fairly narrow specialty. This is very important because the kind of scientists we produce are a whole bunch of very narrow specialists. There are no more broad scientists who know everything. It long ago became impossible for one man to know everything. That day is gone forever. So what we have is we have all kinds of walls and artificial borders between the different aspects, even of the various disciplines, in one discipline. And people work very vigorously, and they keep extending their part. And the old saying is, the way you get ahead in science is you become interested in a very narrow area, you work real hard for 5 years, you become a real expert in this narrow area, and at that point, there's only about 14 people in the United States can really understand everything you write. The rest of them get various degrees of it, but there's only about 14 real specialists where you are. Now, if you will do that, you will get all your papers published, you will achieve stature, you can get funding for your graduate students, and you will have a very successful career. And ladies and gentlemen, you won't do anything to give us the science of the next millennium. You'll move that decimal point one more position maybe in your lifetime, but you won't give us a new science. Einstein told us what we had to do to get a new science. Nobody pays any attention to it. Everything we talk about in science, scientists say laws of nature. Don't you ever get adhering or stuck to that term. There is no law of nature. There are very general rules of behavior given certain assumptions about the way things are in this area. And as long as those assumptions hold, then this particular, quote, law or this rule holds. The moment you violate one of these assumptions, the law goes out the window. You can violate any kind of law you wish to. In physics, that's called broken symmetry. And we wouldn't have anything happen in the world at all if we didn't break symmetry, because that makes something happen and become observable. If it doesn't break the beautiful symmetry, you can't even see it. It's not observable. So when you look through all the jargon and you take it and you wring it out, and you get rid of all of this edifice that's been built up around it, we have some very hard-working people who are caught up in a whole bunch of very narrow specialties, and who have built up tremendous thought edifices, and the very foundations they started from way back down there are very seriously flawed. How seriously flawed? There is no physicist in the world who knows what time is, who knows what charge is, who knows what energy is, or who knows what mass is. Now, if you haven't done any reading in the foundations of physics, that may go right by you, and you say, surely they know what all these things are. They do not, and I quote Noblest Feynman. If you think you're going to find out what energy is and a good definition for it, forget it. You're not. It isn't in there. And so what we have, if we want to have a new science, we have to go down to where these assumptions were made, in some cases 1864, which is when Maxwell's stuff was put together. What would we expect to find if we did this? Let's use Maxwell's theory as an example, because the lights work, the television set works. The greatest thing since sliced bread, right? It's a piece of junk. It's the best that could be done at the time. And then they froze it. Then they made it a dogma. Then they defend it to the death. Then they destroy any scientist who wants to change it. It turns into a dogmatic type of thing, not science. What was the time when Maxwell put together his theory? The atom had not been discovered. The electron had not been discovered. Electricity was thought to be a thin material electric fluid without any divisions in it whatsoever, no structure, flowing through the wires, much like water through a pipe. Faraday, for example, thought that he's the man who put together what we call electrical force and magnetic force based on experiments that had been done by other people, but Faraday stuck it together. Faraday was a great experimenter. His whole book, I think, has got one algebraic equation in it or something like that. He's not a mathematician at all. He was a wonderful experimenter. Faraday had resurrected an old law, an old idea from the 1200s about lines of force. Now, Faraday didn't think of the lines of force in those terms. He thought of them as physical strings, tight strings without anything putting a tension on them. And so, what today we would say is the EM field in space was really a whole series of real tight strings under tension. And when you had a disturbance, what today we would call an electromagnetic wave, you twanged the strings just like you twang a guitar string. Now, Maxwell said, and I quote pretty closely, "I will read no other electrodynamics until I capture what Faraday has mathematically." Get the drift? He accepted these transverse waves and flux strings and all that stuff with no agent producing the tension in the wires. And he captured that in a mathematical theory. And as a matter of fact, he wrote a model of this material ether that everybody breathed in with gears and pulleys and wheels, and you can't believe this stuff. Everybody thought that mass was everywhere. There was a thin material fluid filling the entire universe. There was no place in the universe where mass was absent. Your professor forgot to tell you that, you see, in the classroom. So, in electrodynamics to this day, that material ether, which was destroyed 110 years ago by the Michelson-Morley experiments, which proved there is no matter out there like that, that is still taught in all the textbooks. They say that at every point in the vacuum, in space, there is a unit point coulomb of charged mass, there's a unit point north pole of magnetically charged mass, and there's a unit kilogram of mass sitting at one point. Every point in space has got this humongous, all these sets of mass in it, according to your standard electromagnetic textbook taught in every university. There is nothing in all of electrodynamics anywhere which has anything to say about what form the stuff exists in space devoid of mass. Surely, Tom, you're joking. Well, it is a joke. It's a big joke. Tesla called it the most inexplicable aberration of the scientific mind that's ever been recorded in all of history, and Tesla was right. By the way, it's very fashionable for PhDs in our universities, particularly in the EM departments and electrical engineering departments, to talk about how crude old Tesla was. Now, let me tell you something. One of the greatest electrodynamicists in this country and in the world today is Terry Barrett. If you will read Terry Barrett's analysis of Tesla's actual patented circuits in quaternions, not in tensors and vectors, which are much lower topology algebra, but in the way old Tesla thought, you will discover to your astonishment he did things in those circuits that's in the U.S. Patent Office that none of our PhDs and none of our universities today can do. But if you analyze it in quaternions, there it is. So Tesla had the last laugh. I hope you're beginning to get the picture when I say science has feet of clay. Shifting sand is more like it. Einstein pointed this out and said, we have all these concepts we absorbed with our mother's milk, so to speak. Nobody goes back and checks them, and we ought to rigorously check them and entrap us. into things that are not accurate, or they shield us from a lot of things we could get. And he was right, but nobody does that. By the way, this kind of work is called foundations work. The most thankless job in the entire scientific community, you can't hardly even stay in the scientific community, is to try to do foundations work. What you do is you do applications, move the decimal point one more space, and call it foundations. But you never try to say what is time, what is the charge, or give a definition for charge, or as far as that is, even for mass. Mass is defined in terms of force. You come around and say, what's force? Well, it's defined in terms of mass. It's a little circular definition. It runs around like a dog chasing his tail, never gets anywhere. Much of physics is that way. It is so bad that today it's very fashionable for physicists to say, it is not the business of science to ask what anything is. It is the business of science to ask what things do. If you'll excuse my blunt French, damn! The last time I knew something, the phrase, what things do, contained both things and doing. If you don't know what the cotton-picking things are, you don't know much about what's doing anything. Anyway, I can criticize the scientists because I'm not a working scientist. There's no way you can keep a job if you do the kind of criticism I'm talking about, and actually do it in straight language where you can understand what I'm saying. Now, if I would say, well, there's a problem in defining the electric field in the vacuum. And the way we define electric field is, we say the field is still present, but the force has gone to zero. If you'll check elementary algebra, you will find out you eliminated the field when the force went to zero. So we use the term field for two exactly contradictory things. Mass is part force. Mechanics made an error 400 years ago. There's no such thing as a separate force acting on a separate body. My God, we've known that now for decades. But every textbook still uses it that way because the vector algebra and the tensor algebra that was set up way the hell back there to model this stuff set it up that way, and nobody's ever gone back and questioned it or changed it. So I have one chart with 32 major errors in electrodynamics alone. I didn't get all of them, I just got tired of writing. And they're major flaws. We corrected some of them. I picked some corrections that some other folks have done on some of the others. The amazing thing though, and this is what I want to share with you, when you correct these errors, some very astounding things emerge. And by the way, there are experiments out there now which show the various elements of what I'm talking about. Just now beginning to be integrated. Just now ready to be brought into the scientific community. The thing we've done the last 2 years, and I'm quite confident in saying this, we have solved cold fusion flat. Cold fusion burns time for energy, for fuel. Time turns out to be energy compressed by the factor of c squared, at least c squared. It can be more, but always at least c squared. If you convert just a little of that into ordinary energy, transduce it, you can get all the energy you want anywhere in the universe you wish. For example, let me give you an example. Now, I've got published papers on this. I also have invention disclosures sitting in the U.S. Patent Office with how to enhance and accent and do this stuff and the actual mechanisms involved in it. If you were to take 1 microsecond per second of your time in your area, in this little device where you're working with, and convert that into energy, ordinary energy, convert time energy into ordinary electrical energy, you would have 9 times 10 to the 16th joules per second. That's a lot of energy. Excuse me, microsecond, 9 to 10 to the 10th. I forgot to take the 6 off. You would have 9 times 10 to the 10th joules per second. If you call all of that, turn it into watts, where you actually would power and loads and stuff, you would have 1,000 megajoule power plants, megawatt power plants. And you'd age just a little bit slower while you're running the gadget. Wouldn't that be nice? So, time is the greatest energy source we have. Have at least the energy density of mass. There's not that big a problem, it turns out, in transducing it. There's a big problem in finding out what the transduction mechanism is. It took me 2 years to do that. We have it. We have it in the patent office as a process. We're going to file a formal patent application on it as soon as I can get that $25,000 it takes to pay the patent attorneys. Attorneys are very expensive. But anyway, the kind of science we're moving in, let me give some background now that supports all of this. I just threw something out here to catch your attention. Now I'm going to give you some support. For an awfully long time in quantum field theory, the more or less leading theory of the day is one way of saying that. Quantum field theory, there are 4 polarizations of photons. What the hell do I mean by polarization? Okay, if I got some electromagnetic energy going to move along through space like the Cajuns say, it's going to move along pretty rapid like, because it's going to boogie along at the speed of light, okay? Everybody's got that. But it's just a moving hunk of junk. And there's some energy in this free space here moving along at the speed of light. Now this energy can vibrate sideways this way, can vibrate sideways this way. If you freeze both of those ways, that's a transverse wave. Those two polarizations are. Polarization means which way. That's all it means. Which direction. If it now you freeze both of these, it can't shake sideways. It can still do like an accordion as it's going. And so I have a wave, and I'll act like the wave a little slower. And it's doing this as it's traveling. And that is a longitudinal electromagnetic wave. In fact, that's the simplest one. It's a lot better longitudinal wave than that. But if you would check the Los Alamos National Laboratory website, you will find yourself up here in longitudinal EM waves. Now, suddenly they have discovered longitudinal wave. For 20 years, I've been an idiot for talking about longitudinal wave. Now everybody works with them and shows you that such a wave can travel, if it were pure, had no imperfections, it would have infinite energy and travel at infinite velocity. And that's Los Alamos, that's not Tom Bearden. Since we can't make a pure one, we always make an imperfect one. It can move very, very fast, or it can move very, very slow. It can move faster than the speed of light or slower than the speed of light. And ladies and gentlemen, this is here today. This is not something that we're going to do in the year 3000. This is here today. And you can go over and do a translation into sound, and you can prove these with sound experiments. It works. So the solutions are there now for Maxwell's equations for waves that travel faster than the speed of light, anywhere from c up to almost infinite, and for waves which travel slower than the speed of light, and they call those electromagnetic particles. This is Los Alamos. This is the standard literature, Foundations of Physics, Physical Review, our leading journal. This is not Tom Bearden. So we're in an age already where the speed of light limitation has already vanished. That is an enormous change in all of science. But that ain't all. For years, the theory of general relativity is a funny thing. You kind of assume, remember Einstein has a postulate in relativity. That means I assume it, we're going to shake hands like gentlemen, you're not going to argue that gravity moves at light speed. It doesn't. And we have now proven it doesn't. The least speed that gravity can be moving at is 2 times 10 to the 10th times the speed of light. And that's published in Physical Review A. And astronomy has proven it with several different kinds of experiments. To quote my friend Tom Van Flandern, very fine astronomer and nice general relativist also. Now Tom says it very nicely. He's a perfect gentleman. He's a good sense of humor. But he can say things that are very critical, but he can say them so smoothly you don't even know you've been criticized. Well, I can't do that. So I'm going to have to say them very plainly. If I do the blunt statement of what he says very smoothly, any damn fool with a computer and an orbitable calculation program can prove gravity goes far, far greater than the speed of light, because otherwise all the orbits of the planets and everything would collapse. All you got to do is plug the model in and put in the speed of light and everything blows up. Now, we've been teaching that in all our universities where those machines and those programs blow up for decades. We have taken these students in and put their heads in a cheese press and told them stuff which is flat not true, and anybody with a computer and an orbital program can prove it. Then Tom went on to show you what all the measurements are from astronomy to fix the speed of light. And what they've done is fix the lower limit. And that is the lower limit. 2 times 10 to the 10th times the speed of light. Ladies and gentlemen, that is an enormous change to all of physics, to everything we've ever heard of. Down the road in the next few years, the orthodox scientific establishment, chewing on longitudinal waves and chewing on nearly infinite speed gravity, are going to change all science anyway, and they're going to do it very rapidly. A decade from now, you won't recognize the science, because they're chewing it up. It's spitting out the papers now on Los Alamos site, Foundations of Physics, Physical Review A. It's a very exciting time. It hasn't even made it to the public much yet. But the physicists are excited. They got a new world all of a sudden, new worlds to conquer. Okay, I got you through the side shaking. That was 2 oscillations, X and Y, 2 polarizations. I got you through the longitudinal, which would think of that as the accordion wave, okay? And that alone was startling enough. That changes all the physics. By the way, every physics university now is tearing into longitudinal EM waves. But there's one more. Suppose, clever devil that you are, you went out there and you hung up the accordion. Well, the accordion can't do this. The energy's frozen, but you still got a wave. What's left to wave? Time. That extra dimension. The highly compressed spring, the C² compression energy spring, now is oscillating. Very dense, very powerful oscillation, very powerful curvatures. You're now engineering general relativity. As strong as anything that occurs in those neutron stars and in those black holes and all that. You can do it on the lab bench. I have a paper, an invention disclosure, sitting in the patent office of how to do that. Turns out to be damn simple. I'm going to tell you how to do it before we leave this room. You have to realize another major error, though. The world is made of what we call angular momentum, energy times time. You can make 2 or 3 other variations, but let's hang with that one. That's pretty good, because we're interested in energy. But we're also interested in time energy. I need to make you aware of what a fundamental unit is. It turns out, to most people's absolute astonishment, that there's no such thing as an absolute series of units. They're up for grabs. You can build physics out of any kind of fundamental units you wish to, including 1. You don't have to have those things we use in the textbook. The physicists themselves will tell you this. They change those units when they need to in another problem, another series of different kinds of problems. They change the fundamental units. And some clown one day, just for a lark, did it in time, where time was the only variable. Well, the functions are a nightmare, but it's perfectly good physics. You can't visualize it in your head because it's so complicated, the functions, you know, so many powers and all that. But it works, and it gives you the right answers. No problem. I wanted you to grab that idea, though, and I want you to now say, I'm going to build everything out of energy. A lot of folks in this room look at energy anyway. Why not build it out of energy, right? Well, that means time becomes nothing but a pure function of energy. Think about that. That is rigorous. That's not Tom Bearden, that's physics. So when I say time is energy compressed by the C², all I did was look at what the functions were. It's known that it can be expressed as energy. They just didn't work out the functions. That's some obscure guy did it that I never read. So when I say you can burn time for fuel, I only talked about a special kind of locked up energy. There's no difference in that in mass, about the same energy density. So if you can burn some mass stuff, coal and oil for fuel, you can certainly burn time for fuel. Only it's not burning in the normal sense. You don't have anything physical in your hands, but you can transduce it, change it into another form, which gives you work when you do that. So these are the things and the elements of science right now, today, that are just fixing to explode the entire scientific paradigm again. The explosion already started. It just hasn't made the open literature yet. Now, there are some folks in the world that weaponize the hell out of parts of these. I'm not here tonight to talk about weapons, so I'm not going to. We'll let other people chase that right now. We're going to chase energy systems. We're going to chase a little bit of cold fusion. I'm going to tell you how that works. And then I'm going to tell you how the mind works. Because the real thing is coming down the pipe and almost upon us is the direct engineering of mind. I'm going to start with that first. Because this group is more interested in that probably than they are the other. So let's start with the mind stuff first. From quantum field theory, I take this other polarization where it's time that's being oscillated. Now I want you to say right where you sit, I want you to suddenly realize that as your physical body moves in 3 space, your mind moves in time, the time domain.
Does time oscillate in?
Wait just a second. All I want you to know right now is see, you use up some time in changing in space. You can't change in space without changing in time. The basic element is space-time, not space. Perception and observation are partial with respect to t, a time differentiation, so you rip the time off, throw it away. We can show you where the photon interaction does that. When I was in grad school, I discovered the mechanism that generates flow of time. Nobody was interested, absolutely nobody. Time is not an external river on which mass floats along like a boat on a river, just floating down the stream. It's made on each individual piece of mass by the sum total of all the photon interactions, both virtual and observable. The photon carries not only energy but time, it's a piece of angular momentum, and they completely ignore the time component. To absorb a photon is to charge the mass with energy and excite it that way, and also to charge it with time. Now, if I use the one where I don't let the energy vary, I charge the mass with time only. And that is marvelous. That's all your paranormal phenomena. If we really want to, we can generate all the UFO phenomena, the part that's not man-made.
Can you say that again?
If you charge it with this special wave, where time is what's oscillating, the energy in 3 space is not moving. You don't have an accordion, you have a slug. But time is oscillating. The rate of flow of time in the local area is changing.
Can you explain that? Time oscillating means you're going back and forth in time?
No. It means the rate of flow of time at which each part is processed and speeds up and slows down. It's time that's doing the accordion bit now, see, not the spatial energy. We just shifted over to what it is that's doing the accordion.
How do you find speed at that other time?
How do you what?
As time is flowing, moving, the velocity, you need another time to do that. Time can't move something per unit time.
Well, it's observer time, per observer time. The external observer is always external to what the phenomena you're describing. Remember, everything in physics, there's nothing in physics that describes reality. It describes what the external observer sees.
Is that global?
Of course. There's no such thing as physics of reality. There's physics of what an observer would see. And by the way, we don't let him be but one observer at a time, because if we put 2 or 3 in there, we get many universes.
That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, we get things where the wave function don't collapse and physics goes insane. Perfectly good physics, but nobody likes it. It's printed in, I think, Physical Review, Everett's paper, one of the leading journals.
So when you're talking about compressing, expanding time, and maybe some of these folks are thinking about like apparitions or ghosts or whatever, you can't really think of going backward or forward in time, but you have to think of...
I didn't say you couldn't think of going backward and forwards in time. We're going to get to that.
But aren't you also talking about, aren't you maybe presupposing too that every central plane at the same time,
No.
and we're just...
No. Where's this time
oscillating
you're
back
talking
and
about?
forth?
Remember, I said very carefully, time, the rate of flow through time, occurs right on the object itself by the photon interactions on it. It's an engineerable process. I can engineer it at will. Now, when people talk about time reversing something, unfortunately, everybody immediately thinks it's like time travel in science fiction. It is not. Let me explain what time travel would be. Suppose I wanted to travel back in time to where we first came in the door some minutes ago. if I wanted to travel in time, but I didn't want you to, I'd have to keep the whole rest of the world, everything else in the world, and back it up to what it all was a few minutes ago. But I would stay in the presence and I wouldn't get time reversed. But I would time reverse you and you and you and you and the whole cotton picking universe. Nobody says we can do that. We're not even interested in that. What I want to do is take this book and make it be something it was a while ago. I can do that. Yes?
I know time has been stopped 4 times since the first of the year. When this time is stopped, does it stop the whole time in all of the universe?
I don't know that it stopped.
It's been stopped 4 times. So
Well, that's a conjecture. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it's a conjecture. There's no proof of that. When I say proof, I don't mean that something's absolute. I mean there's experimental support for it. You've got to be clear what I'm talking about. I'm not preaching absolutism. I'm really talking about modeling, because that's all physics is a model. There's nothing absolute in physics. You can do anything in physics you're clever enough to discover how to do. It's a model. If you can change a model and get a new way that'll work out there in the physical world, you're free to do it. But you got to have some experiments behind it. It doesn't become an acceptable model until something supports it. Okay, so what we got is, I want to engineer the mind. Well, the mind already oscillates in time. Every function that the mind occurs, all the memory, all the thoughts, the emotions and everything, uses time oscillations, either as photons, time polarized photons, or time polarized waves. Now, I did a NERAC document search. I didn't do an exhaustive one, but I did a pretty good one. I came up with 16 references to photons that are time polarized. They're called scalar photons. I didn't come up with a single reference in the entire Western literature that they scanned for me on time polarized EM waves, because nobody has ever known how to make one. Now I'm going to tell you how to make all this stuff. And I'm going to tell you how to transduce it from one end to the other. If I take an ordinary transverse wave and I realize it carries time as well as energy, it's made of angular momentum. It's not made just of energy like they teach in all the textbooks. There's a piece of time to every piece of energy in that wave. But it's made of photons, and photons are energy times time, delta E, delta T, last time I looked. If you look at that and you look at impulse, and model time in the imaginary domain, and what you will find is, if you add the phase conjugate replica to that wave, to that transverse wave, you freeze X and Y, because the impulses become opposite. And the thing can't get an impulse to move anything in one direction laterally. So you've frozen the lateral vibrations, and it will then turn into a longitudinal wave. However, that wave is not made of photons. You have to go down to the photon in the wave and the antiphoton that made up the phase conjugate wave replica, and you have those paired also together, and those pairs are spin 2, and they're called gravitons. You have just unified electrodynamics and general relativity with an engineerable fashion, and you've structured the gravity because you've structured the gravitons. Okay, but I made from transverse wave, I have a process which can be done in the laboratory which will generate longitudinal waves. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you something we've done in the laboratory. I'm not going to talk about it, but I'm in a separate venture with a French partner in France. I couldn't get anybody to do the damn experiments here. And we have made longitudinal waves. They work fine. Now, so now we got longitudinal waves, but they're different from what Los Alamos is carrying on their sites, because they're using a longitudinal spin 1 photon, and I'm using spin 2 gravitons, the structures inside. I have a much more advanced wave than what they're using. And I'm telling you, this wave works in the lab because we've done it. Now, suppose I want to get to this time wave. How do I do that? Well, I got a process here. It's called phase conjugate, replica, addition, coupling. If I do this again, I'll stop the impulse on the accordion. Now the 3-space energy can't vibrate, so it has to vibrate in time. And that's all you do to make a time polarized EM wave. But it's now made of those longitudinal gravitons and antigravitons, so it's a spin 4. supergraviton structure, and each graviton is structure. I got super general relativity. Well, I couldn't figure out how to go back the other way. But in cold fusion, I could identify that it's happening. And the answer turned out to be very simple, interferometers, for goodness sake. If you take the time polarized waves, interfere two of them, makes longitudinal waves. Take two of them, interfere them, makes transverse waves. Simple as that. Now we can do this. If you don't get anything else and you're a scientist or an engineer, get this. If I want to go from transverse waves to longitudinal waves of a special kind that are also involve gravity to the supergravitational kind or the time polarized waves, I do that with phase conjugation. That's all I have to do. If I want to go the other way, I do it with interferometry. Now, when I make the time polarized waves, I have now entered not only the material domain, but the domain of the mind. If I now structure and I measure in that domain what the mind is doing, you can measure thoughts, emotions, images, pictures, and everything. The people ahead of that, of the whole world in that, is the KGB weapons scientists in Russia. They do have everything I'm talking about. Unfortunately, I wish to God I could say they didn't, but they do. Now, you can engineer mind at any level. Mind functions are totally electromagnetic functions, but they're special kinds, the kinds I'm talking about. They're not in your textbook. They're not the transverse stuff we study. They're the kind I'm talking about tonight. They're already engineering the human mind to some extent. Certainly the Russians are, the KGB folks are. Let me give you an example. I will make one exception to the weapons. In 1997, there was a reason for this test. I'm not going into that. A young pilot, very fine individual named Captain Bearden, took off in his A-10 in Arizona, headed for the test range. Suddenly, Bearden turned, flew off at an angle, and for over an hour flew around, ignored people on the phone, did a circle in one, probably dropped his ordnance there, probably still thinking he's over the range at that point. Flew on off, everything's happy and go lucky as far as he's concerned, everything's normal, ran out of gas, crashed, and exploded. He was instantly thrust in a hypnagogic state, and we give you a background for the weapons, for the developments, even patents in the U.S. from the Russians that show you how to do some of that. In the 70s. Go to Lisitzin in the 60s and we can show you that they were doing it then. So he was instantly in a hypnagogic state. That's a waking dream state. So here I am, I'm Captain Bearden, and suddenly I'm in a waking dream. Now, almost everybody in this room knows what a waking dream state is, so I'm not going into that to try to take the next 10 minutes to explain it to you. But you know what it is. And you can do like your dream walking, dream talking, or whatever. And your perception is controlled. What you think about your perception, your thoughts are controlled. And you're going along and you're flying your A-10 and everything, all of a sudden you're flying in the wrong direction. You're about 110 degrees off, so you're correct. And you're going, and you fly, and suddenly you're over the range. So you go and you do your circle, and you drop your ordnance, and you take and you're going home, but you're going over and run out of fuel and crash in the mountain. That's what happened to Captain Bearden. As I say, there's a reason for why that test was done. 2 months later, right at 2 months, the most experienced A-10 pilot in this country was Captain Svoboda, a lady pilot, from the same wing that Captain Bearden came from. She taught the other pilots night flying in the A-10. Over the range, Svoboda is pulling out from weapons release. Superb pilot. If there's one pilot in the whole damn Air Force who knows better than to look over her shoulder and get target fixation on what her bombs did, it was her. But she taught everybody else not to do that. Bing! Hypnagogic state, bang! Up is down and down is up. Flip your sense of up and down. So Svoboda instantly perceives she's diving, corrects it to climb, dives right into the ground and explodes. There was a reason for the test. I'm not going into the weapons past that point. What I'm telling you is there are actual tests, there are many others, involving the use of the kind of waves and stuff I'm talking about to directly engineer the human mind at a distance. And the guys way ahead of the whole pack unfortunately, is the KGB, and they mean to kill us with it,
When was that
not
crash?
help us.
When was that crash?
That was in 97. Both crashes were in 97. Okay,
Are you saying the KGB did that?
yes, their weapon systems did that. I'm saying there's a very good reason for that, which I'm not going into here. With the proper people, in the proper place, I have already been very deeply into the reasons for that test, but this is not the proper place, and this is not the proper audience. You have to understand that, and I just can't say any more about that. It is open source because I wrote it open source, you see, before anybody believed it. Okay, but what I'm looking at is the next millennium. Technology can be used either for good or for bad. Now let's let the damn fools out there worry about using it for the bad. They're going to do that. They always do that. There's nothing I can do about that. What could we do to use it for good? Oh boy. If we'll develop that, and it'll take some time, it won't happen in 2 weeks. Wouldn't it be nice if every kid in the world could have the equivalent of about 5 PhDs? You could load the education into his head just like you load your computer. That's coming. Now, we don't want you to load and change his personality and his free will. That's coming too, and they're going to try to change everybody with it. We don't want that to happen. But we do want it to be used to help you. Because if kids had the training and the knowledge, there wouldn't be a bunch of kids that can't work and don't have the skills and can't get a job. There wouldn't be industries looking for people if there's no trained people available. They would like to hire some more. Everybody could be trained. We will have for the first time freedom of education added to our fundamental freedoms. The other thing you could do, you could address psychological problems. I'm talking about the very deep ones that totally disable people and destroy lives. I'm not talking about the little quirks that we all have. I'm talking about the thing that really ruin and kill and hurt people very badly. For the first time, we now have a tool where we can reach in and simply change it. We don't have to go through 20 years or 10 years of psychotherapy. When this gets developed down the road a bit, we can go in and say, oh yeah, fix this, clang, and we fix the software. There is no more stress in the individual, and there is no more psychological problem. We have nothing out there now like that. Okay. In France, if you can pump in the time domain, and to do that, you've got to get to the longitudinal wave. The cells and the parts of them make the other phase conjugate automatically. All you got to do is get to longitudinal waves. When you charge those up, you time reverse the entire cell and every part of it back to a previous state. What did I say? What about an AIDS patient? The problem is the immune system in the body, which doesn't heal anything. That's the killers and all. It doesn't heal anything. The immune system attacks the AIDS, the HIV virus invaders with great ferocity. And it gets about 99% of them first shot. But it doesn't get all of them. And the ones that are left are the more hardy strains. And as they reproduce some more, it attacks again and again, and it is continually selecting more strains that are hardier and hardier. And pretty soon, its own cells are being infected, and pretty soon it loses the battle. And then the body is open to any. You don't die of AIDS. Nobody dies of AIDS. You die of opportunistic infections when your body can no longer resist. Anything, you know, pneumonia, flu, whatever can kill you. Just wipe you right out of there. Wouldn't it be nice if you could irradiate the whole body with non-ionizing radiation, time charge the whole body, and reverse all those cells back to where there was not a single, because you reverse the genetics and all, and this is proven in France in the 60s and the early 70s. Beautiful results in the literature, and they suppressed that program like it had never been. The French government spent several $1 million on it. Eminent scientists worked on it. The results were revolutionary. Well, we can't have the big drug companies wiped out, so they destroyed that. I will have a book, if I can ever get it finished, on the exact mechanisms by which that a priori mechanism and those scientific results actually were obtained in lab animals in the laboratory, in rigorous experiments. But basically, the human regenerative system, that for which Becker was nominated for a Nobel Prize, which is the system that cures damaged cells. The immune system cures nothing, so we don't study the regenerative system, we study the killers. Everybody wants to kill something. What you do is you just take the cells in their genes and you simply reverse them back to a form they were months and months before, even years before, when there was no disease. That's the way to cure AIDS. By the way, they cured cancer, terminal tumors in lab animals, horrible tumors. Every rat is going to be dead in 30 days, 100% certain. Take 30 rats, separate them in two groups of 15. They're eating the same cages, eat the same food, same environment, everything. Treat 15, the other 15 don't get it. 15 get treated, all live. 15 don't get treated, all die. Simple as that. One difference, take a drop of blood out of a healthy rat that recovered. Take another rat with that same terminal tumor, inject one drop of blood in him, you'll get well. We explained that too. That's a little bit more complicated. I don't want to go into that tonight. But coming from the use of the new kinds of waves, new kind of physics is trying to be born, is a totally revolutionary type of healing. They cured terminal tumors, they cured arteriosclerosis, they cured infectious diseases, and they also restored suppressed immune systems in those lab animals. Beautiful results. So we will have, if it ever gets born again, a totally new and revolutionary system of medicine coming out of this. Told you about getting an education, loading the software. The energy, I made that apparent. We will build devices like cold fusion. Let's explain to you how cold fusion works. A time forward process is a process where for a particle, one particle sitting here, he's got, I'm going to use waves. I prefer waves to the particle view. You can use either one. He's got more forward time waves rather than phase conjugate waves interacting with him than he has phase conjugates. So he appears to move forward time. All that time reversal is when you reverse the kind of wave that's interacting with him. If he's got more phase conjugates interacting with him, he's backing up all the time. You got antiphotons pushing him backwards instead of forwards in time, predominantly. When you load the palladium lattices with positive charges, they by definition are time reversed. They're charge conjugated. If you check, that's time reversal also. What you have done is around the loaded lattice, you create little zones begin to appear sporadically in decay, where suddenly there's more phase conjugate waves present than there are time forward waves. Now, isn't that wonderful? But I'm going to tell you something marvelous. If you're writing, write this down. Because your prof only taught you half of the law of attraction and repulsion of charged particles. He taught you what always happens in forward time interactions, did he not? Did any sweet swinging so-and-so ever tell you what happens when the time is running backwards? Hell no, like the Cajun says.
I don't believe it anyway.
What happens is, like charges attract, and unlike charges repel. You know, the way we do time reversal in physics, we take a photo, like a videotape of it, and we run the tape backwards. You can visualize time reversal, just take what you normally see, run the tape backwards, and that's what time reversal is. So if I see two particles repelling one another apart in forward time, and I'm going negative time, what are they doing? They're attracting. Lo and behold, when two protons, by the way, there's a very famous rule in physics, a Pauli exclusion principle, that prevents a single proton from being time reversed, but you can do it in pairs. Fermion individually can't be time reversed, but 2, 4, 6, 8 can, because they act like quasi-bosons. So what happens is these two protons find themselves suddenly in this time reversal zone and say, oh boy, we love each other. There is no Coulomb barrier. The law changed. You see the law flipped. There went the Coulomb barrier. Bingo. So the two protons go boom. A couple more go boom. And they all get together in a nice social hug and they become quasi-nucleo called proton clustering. And if there's one thing they've measured accurately in fusion, it's proton clusters. Ken Shoulders has got his whole approach based on that. And by the way, these clusters are tighter than any physicist can do in colliding beams. Isn't that interesting? I didn't have to add the energy, and now I changed the law added the energy, and the closer they got, the stronger they're attracted. When they reach the strong force region and just enter that and get some strong force, now they're quasi-nuclei and you forget the charge. It stops about there. You enter the strong force region. You now have a quasi-nuclei. Okay, let's take two protons that are now lying together, then a little bit in strong force region, and held together as clusters of two protons. Now that's a perfectly viable nuclear state in a time reversal zone. It's very excited if the time reversal zone decays, which it does. It's a temporary thing. When the waves, most of the waves start to become normal waves, this thing's suddenly in an excited state. If you're writing, here's another one to write down. Because this, your professor never told you this. Physicists normally try to beat their way into something. And what they do is get a bigger hammer and they batter against the Coulomb barrier. Boom! If you can't get in there, get more energy and hit that sucker harder. It's like having a car. If you can't get in there at 60 miles an hour, go 300. Really, high energy physics is basically on the ground. Once the Coulomb barrier went, I don't even have to have a hammer. They already get together. But when that decays, it's in a time reversal zone. Remember, everything's backwards. The changes don't start from outside and try to work their way inside. They start at every point inside the nucleus, inside the quarks, at each point in space-time, inside the nucleus, and they start out, what's the first thing to hit? The quarks. So what do? You change quarks. You can engineer the quarks inside a proton or a neutron far easier than you move the damn proton or the neutron with this stuff. It's hard to translate the proton. Devilishly easy to flip the quarks. Well, what happens is excited states decays. First thing you start changing is the quarks. One of the protons flips into a nucleus, to another nuclide called a neutron. A neutron and proton, that's deuterium. That's where the extra deuterium is coming from. If you load up then, in one of these time reversal zones, I get a little deuterium ion, which is just one positive charge. I get a hydrogen ion. They get together and they make a quasi-nucleus. When they come back out, another proton flips to give me a stable state in the time forward zone. And bingo, that's the tritium. That's where everybody's getting the tritium. Where the hell are they getting the alpha particles? Real simple. Suppose I get two of those deuterium nucleides together in a time reversal zone. When they come out, they're already stable. We call that a helium-4 nucleus, and that's an alpha particle. And that's where they're getting all the extra alpha particles. Now, I won't go into the instrumental anomalies that are occurring in the Navy facilities over at China Lake. When you use longitudinal waves, you have to look at the past time history and the time charges on the individual instruments. Their history is significant. Two identical instruments where time is not involved now are not identical. They could be made in the same day, on the same factory line. If they had a different history, they differ in their instrumental results. We were able to explain all of those instrumental anomalies, and that's very rigorous work. We were able to explain all of the cold fusion interactions for physics. They've never. And of course, clever devil that I am, I filed an invention disclosure on that. I think that'll be worth some money one day. I might even get a salary one day. Who knows? Presently, what I'm telling you has cost me 30 years, a little over $10,000 a year. I have about $400,000 out of the back of my pocket invested in the work that I'm just giving you a real quick sketch of tonight. Anyway, I'm going to end this up real quick. I don't want to keep you too long. We are going to have a science, a totally new science for the next millennium. It has already started being born. It just hadn't made the kind of development I've been giving it here and the spin on it I've given it here tonight. But it's started. The explosion in science has already begun. You are going to have direct engineering of the mind, and by the way, that includes the entire human species and any other species on Earth. And if you wish, Gaia is available also. We're going to have to beat the Russians because the KGB intends to engineer the collective human unconscious, Jung's collective unconscious mind, and convert us all to something like an ant society, with the elite running it, of course, outside the society. We've got to beat that, or that's the fate of the human species before the end of the next millennium. So we're in a kind of a race, but if we'll use it for the good and get by the bad stuff, we can have a marvelous science we've never dreamed of. By the way, anti-gravity comes out of this like a ton of bricks, no problem. If you can engineer all the general relativity and you're using a strong EM force for your agent of curvature, of course you can do anti-gravity, no problem. So We have a marvelous science looking at us. We have to do, however, one thing. This is a little bit more akin to many of the motives of people in this audience. Years and years ago, I looked at the human condition and the human problem. I looked at everything I could look at it and tried, every kind of ism, every kind of law, regulation, sweet reason, religions, dogma, isms, whatever. It's like Lincoln said, some of them work for some of the people some of the time. But there's nothing out there we've ever run into that works for everybody all the time. And I'm going to tell you how to fix that. Because if we make it to there, we will survive. If we don't, we're going to destroy ourselves in the next millennium. This human species will explode. It's easy to show that theoretically. When male deer struggle, for example, this is an example, it's not universal, don't press it too far, over whatever, females, territory, whatever, they fight stylized and they struggle fiercely, and one wins. One's stronger than the other and one prevails. But when the other one finally weakens and starts to flee, the other male deer does not pursue him and kill him. He's perfectly capable of doing that. And it hasn't got a damn thing to do with morality. He doesn't think about morality. He has a switch in him which throws and says, you stop and you prance around to show the females what a fine lad you are and how lucky they are to have you, and that's it. All the anger takes off then and goes and transcends into that area. To be an intelligent species, we tore out all these stops and balances so we'd have more software. We tore out the firmware to have more software. We got to put one piece of firmware back in, nothing else. We don't want to deny freedom. We don't want to end society. But I need a thing in the collective human unconscious which reacts instantly, and this is a doable. It'll take a long time, a lot of money, but it's doable. So that if I raise an axe with intent to sink it in your head, the switch throws, and I stop, and the intent goes. Wouldn't it be nice? I didn't say we stopped competition. We stopped it when I start to kill somebody, or hurt somebody, or blow up children, or explode an atomic bomb on somebody. We just suddenly go and do something else. If we succeed in putting that switch in during this next millennium, before the Russians put in the end society switch, we really will come into the golden age. If you're biblical, fine. Interpret it any way you wish to. We will have the 1,000 years of beauty. If we don't do it, we will be consumed by the lake of fire. Now what I'm trying to say is if enough people get aware of this, and the scientists get aware of it, let's opt for the science of the beautiful millennium. Thank you very much.
Either you or someone working with the same experience that you're working with has stopped time 1/10 of a second 4 times since the first of the year.
See, I have trouble with that if we can't produce any evidence of it.
And it will not show up on an atomic clock, because you checked the atomic
Then
clock.
I can't go for it if there's no evidence. See, I base only something that's got some experimental. I don't say you're wrong.
And
Don't
it's ready to
misunderstand.
move it up to 1 second. From 1 second, they're moving it to 30 seconds.
But it's certainly possible to transduce time. God help us, we don't want to transduce all of it. That would be a stoppage of time. You can do that theoretically. If you balance exactly the phase conjugate, I'll get to you in just a moment now. If you balance exactly the phase conjugate interactions with the normal wave interactions on a particle, that particle will stop in time. That is absolutely true. But to do it for the whole Earth
But you
would
are
be
changing time.
an incredible, massive operation. This lady wanted a question.
You were talking about using the radioactive type treatment to cure certain illnesses.
No, just EM waves, not radioactivity at all. No.
Okay, is that sound waves or
No, it's
light waves?
as it was used in France and what we've been working on and what we've got the first leg, we've got the ankle up on the saddle. We ain't up on the horse. You understand? We just got an ankle on the saddle, but we have got an ankle on the saddle. What we're using is the longitudinal wave radiation like Priori did. Now, I've already filed with the Patent Office 2 dramatic extensions to that. Let me think a moment about something about whether to say this or not, please. And I apologize for that, but sometimes it's necessary. I believe I can get away with saying this. Okay, yeah, I can get away with it. I got it printed, so I'm okay. There's a lot of folks in the world, and I won't go into that, that are playing around with mind control. The Soviets are doing it, the Russians, the KGB are doing it with precision control and the kind of technology I was talking about, like a surgeon's scalpel. We're doing it, some guys are somewhere, some kind of programs. I'm not interested in even following that or looking at it. With brute force. I came up with a way from the nature of a dielectric. There's a beautiful mechanism that's almost entirely escaped the attention of physics that I found in a couple of papers. That means I can short circuit that whole painful process of building up these waves. And I can use, if this works, and now this is not proven yet, okay? Let me accent this. But if this works, and everything that I'm capable of checking, it will work. But it's still got to be proven before, experimentally, before we can say it works. Within my capability, everything I can check, it will work. Let me put it that way. Then we can jump start all the way by all of that painful transduction of the waves. I can use ordinary waves in a very special fashion nobody has thought of. And I can force every particle in that mass, whether it's living or dead, to charge in the time domain only. Now, if I can do that, I can do in 30 seconds what it took Priori several hours to do with longitudinal waves, because they have a small interaction, cross-section.
We already have certain weaponry that is in place. It was even, there was a show about 2 weeks ago on TLC that showed the equipment that's used to produce severe EMF waves to make people ill, and as a destruction type weaponry.
Well, that's easy.
Is this the same
That's easy.
type of weapon?
No.
Of equipment,
No.
or is this different?
There are very special waveforms that's been in the open literature now for decades. If you want to stop the heart, you can put this special form on there, and it causes your heart to go into fibrillation, and you will die if you stay in fibrillation. If they hold it on you 1 minute, you're likely it's not going to expire. So there's several versions of that. I haven't been struck with that damn thing. I'm quite familiar with that one. I won't give you any details about that, but I have a witness, living witness. Marinoff didn't live to tell his. But they have several versions of it, you know, longer ones and shorter ones. They have some that apparently as small as a pocketbook. Can be carried. If you've got a pretty good sized pocket in your coat, you can carry it in there. That's the one I got hit with, or I wouldn't be here to talk today. So, but that's been well known. That's well known stuff. It's been well known for decades. You can do other things that mess up all your red blood cells, really give you a number in your blood, and you can do some other things with ELF particularly that disturb the corpus callosum, where you're coordinating the 2 cerebral hemispheres of your brain, go into seizures, all kinds of stuff. That is a well-known set of stuff. So can you build death rays out of it? Of course. You can use high-power microwave and just flat blast you or burn you right where you sit. Of course. Laser beams, if they're powerful enough, same thing. But I'm not talking about any of that stuff at all. I'm talking about something totally different from that. See, the most insidious one is the one that doesn't have to come in and hit all these barriers to get in there. It starts in there and works its way out. That's the most insidious one. Yes?
Someone involved. Here's a question. Where is Everett right now? There used to be an Everett here. He was here in Huntsville.
That Everett? I don't know. I lost track of him years and years ago.
About you, Everett?
Yeah.
Are you talking about Everett's Many Worlds or the Everett that was here?
Well, I'm not sure
There was a young lad named Everett here. I lost track of him years ago. I believe Hugh Everett the third is dead.
Worked with Fairbank.
Huh?
Worked with Fairbank. With Stanford.
The only 2 Everetts I ever knew were those 2. I didn't know.
You, Everett, I think
He's dead. Hugh Everett the third.
Okay, that's the one that was.
That's one with the many universes interpretation.
Okay, now the other one is, this fellow Sweet, was that around San Francisco, in California?
No, he was in the greater Los Angeles area.
Well, I may have been in his lab one time, this one. although maybe somebody else. But this guy,
I'll pass that one up.
this guy.
Some things I better watch what I
This
say.
guy,
Okay.
this guy.
Somebody here had a
This guy
question.
didn't impress me. He didn't impress me.
If you were with Floyd Sweet and he didn't impress you with what he had, you need to go back and look again. You must have been with the wrong one.
Tom, I got
Yes.
two questions and a statement. Statement, I've been working on mind control ever since being called something stupid.
No, you're not.
And
You're not.
I think Monroe is legend.
If it works, it works.
Okay. The other is a question for Angelo, and that is, who are they? And the other is a question for you. In time reversal, what happens to entropy?
Oh, it's neg entropy. You see, an open system's far from equilibrium. We have a whole thermodynamics of that for the last 20-something years. Prigogine got a Nobel Prize in '77 for his contributions to the field in chemistry. Such a system, if it's open and freely receiving energy from outside and producing broken symmetry in that inflow, that system is allowed to do this, as you know, in this equilibrium. It's allowed to self-oscillate, self-organize, put out more energy than you yourself put in. It simply takes the excess from its
In
external
other words,
environment.
you're getting energy out of entropy rather than putting energy in to organize.
That's right. It's self-organizing. See, this is already in the textbooks. I got a beautiful text, for example, by what appears to be an Israeli type author, or a Russian one. He's working in Israel, whatever nationality he has. He has a name that could be either Jewish or Russian. I think he's Russian Jew. But I have a beautiful book on that whole system that's available, a very current book right now, on that whole area of those kinds of systems. See, we were always shot down in over unity by the people that hit us with classical thermodynamics. If the system is in equilibrium with its external environment, I assure you it will never go over unity. Second law of thermo will nail you every time, and all you can produce is growing entropy. The best you can do is ever break even. We call that superconductivity. That's the best you could do. You can't beat entropy, and you cannot beat the second law of thermo if the system stays in equilibrium with its external environment. Now that's interesting because Maxwell's equations, before Lorentz got a hold of them, the Heaviside Maxwell's equations, before Lorentz changed them further, did include and does include systems which are both the kind of systems of local equilibrium and therefore obeys the normal thermodynamics with its second law. It also includes systems which are not in equilibrium, which do not obey that second law, and which do obey the other kind of thermodynamics. Now, Lorentz taught you to throw all those systems away that don't obey it. So he taught you to throw all the over-unity systems away. There's a little clever trick he taught that did that, regauging the equations symmetrically. Any fool knows today in physics, symmetry means non-observable. You don't get it. They ain't gonna show on your instruments. They ain't gonna show on your power meter. Broken symmetry means observable. You're going to get it on your instruments. It's going to show. You can measure it. So if you force the system into symmetrical regauging, you have forced it into a system. He did 2 asymmetrical regaugings to do that, and carefully selected only the ones whose forces were equal and opposite. He put the system into additional stress. He changed its energy twice, and he says, before you have any electrical system take off, we got a magic demon in here, a Lorentz demon, which is going to do this operation on me, and that's the only kind of system you're going to look at. And I say, nonsense. I want the other system that does the other thing. I don't want what you guys are doing. I want those that he threw away. And I usually quote Jackson, 2nd edition, up around page 220, to show you the symmetrical regauging that Lorentz taught everybody to do. And since then, everybody, just like little parrots, has been doing that because it makes the variables separable, makes the equations easy to solve. It's very convenient, and they didn't think the potentials had any reality anyway. They didn't do this as diabolical. It's not diabolical. They did it as a mathematical convenience to turn the equations into a form that was easy to solve. Nobody asked what they were doing because everybody knew the potentials were just a mathematical figment. Well, we know today they're not. They're the primary reality, if you believe quantum mechanics. Question?
What do you know about the Philadelphia experiment? Is that
What I know about the Philadelphia experiment, I'm not going to talk about. I'm sorry to cut you short, but I can't. I'm not going to talk about that one.
Is it real?
There's some
I
things
read
in
the
this.
book. Is the things they tell in the book real?
I'm not gonna comment on it. There's some things in this life I can work on. I've got more than I'm gonna ever get accomplished the rest of my life. Right now, I'm 4 books behind, approaching a 5th behind. If I live to do that, that is the rest of my life's work. The things that I'm gonna get in trouble with if I go around in somebody else's turf, I'm not going to mess with. And as long as they will let me work on energy and medical applications, they can do whatever the hell they wish to with the rest of this stuff. If I can just help get started a new kind of medicine and clean, free energy systems, that's worth my life work. I don't want to throw my life away. Yes?
I heard this dude on the Artel show last week say that some people in Europe have now developed the mathematics of mind over matter.
It's not that hard to develop. The mind-to-body coupling, and there's a reverse coupling of the body back to the mind. Fairly simple. You can take it right out of general relativity if you look at it. Once you accept that the mind is doing time operations, but every time there's a time change, it actually makes a curvature, a move, a rotation, excuse me. The Lorentz transforms or rotations in 4-dimensional space. And so if you're operating in the time domain, you make a change. If it's a mental change, a thought, an emotion, whatever, filing of something in your memory, it makes a little rotation. That's a tiny projection in the virtual state over in your real 3-dimension, what we call a mass state, your body. If you do a series of those coherently, that's what we call intent in the old unresolved philosophical problem. And if they're coherent, they integrate into observable form. You get a broken symmetry. You get an actual physical input of 3-dimensional energy down in your 3 space. That's just general relativity. It's not Tom Bearden. Now, as the body starts to make a move in accordance with that, do a servo mechanism theory on your body, you can get the amplification, you can get the use of the input signal, once you get it, to do the behavior, the functions. But every time the body starts to move, every piece of mass in it is doing a rotation also, which is a little projection back into the time domain. And it's coherent because the body is doing a coherent move. And so when it integrates back over there to give you an observable change in the time domain, then what you have is you have the coupling back to the body to the mind. And the mind simply sits there and looks at what it was sending out and what it's getting in and compares the two and adjusts the behavior. We just saw for you the humongous problem of intent, it's called by the philosophers. And this is why the physicists haven't gone into minds. They haven't considered the mind had any reality. They teach in physics. Basically, most physicists believe we're meat computers. And they stay with the energy, they don't stay with the time. We're beginning to see this change. The time polarized photon is in quantum field theory. The wave is not. But if you've got time polarized photons, you darn sure got time polarized waves. And I think my contribution has been how you can make one of them. Once the physicists get onto that, you can forget Tom Bearden, they'll take you to the next level. My work's done. By the way, a foundations guy's work is this. He's a stick of dynamite. My job is to blow a hole in the brick wall. It's not to make a nice door. In other words, I'm to blow the hole. Once the hole is done, these guys can make a better door than I could ever dream of having the capability, and they will. But first, we've got to have the hole, so that's my function. Let's try to blow the hole. You usually hit the wall a lot of times before you ever get a hole, like 30 years. Question?
It's interesting that Bob Lazar talked to in his work at Area 51 that he talked about one of the things they were trying to do was engineer the strong nuclear force for anti-gravitics.
You can do it, you can get into the edge of it if you time reverse the zone, because then the natural attraction of 2 like charges will bring you into the strong force region. They will not get you into all the way, so we shouldn't use the term nucleus as long as we have the time reversal zone going. We should use the term quasi-nucleus. But it does have strong force holding it. Those clusters are being held. The physicist working with Hal Fox, and I've suddenly gone blank, I forgot the number, is something like 1,000 or 10,000 times as strongly held together as the colliding beam experiments can ram them together. So we know something revolutionary is going on here. There's no question about this. It's replicable. The question is, how on earth can you get them to do that without putting all this energy in beams and all? And that's it. The time energy, you're actually using energy, and you're doing high energy experiments But when you do the time domain, you've got a compaction. You're working with a c² amplifying factor. You're working with c² times as much energy as you've got put in. So you've got this big amplifier working for you when you let time do the work by reversing. Yes?
You know anything about sound, background sound being separated from the regular sound on a large area, say the size of this shopping mall here? If you're at the end of it, it's just like walking through a wall, and walk right back into it.
No, I haven't looked at that kind of phenomenon at all. I just haven't looked at it. I'm not familiar with it. I don't like to comment on something I hadn't looked at. A lot of people ask me, what about this fellow's energy device? And if I hadn't done any work on it to study, I could say, you know, you'll have to ask him. I have no idea. I haven't looked at it. Yes?
There's a lot of talk about photon belt, that we're moving into a photon belt. Is there any scientific basis for that?
Well, we're always in a photon belt.
But is it something that would affect consciousness, that would affect us in a lot, or affect energy, or affect our lives?
Well, actually, you've asked a very deep question. And somebody clue me on the time. Are we behind, forward, or what?
5 and 7. 5 minutes forward.
5 minutes, okay. It'll take about 5 minutes in this last question. I need to tell you something else. To even answer that question, I need to tell you something else. Around the Earth is got a magnetic field. It's also got a very powerful electric field from the surface of the Earth to the electrosphere. And if you look at the Poynting energy flow and you do the cross vectors, and those people that do this, by the way, half of them do it wrong, do it backwards. But if you get it right, there is a vast Poynting energy flow circulating the Earth all the time due to the Earth on generatrix Poynting energy generation from west to east, parallel to the equator. Now, every part of your body is continually being bathed with this at all times. And there is some interaction with 10 to the minus 13th reaction cross-section. And so we really do live in a, quote, natural Poynting energy flow environment, and that's the great flow around the Earth. There's even several great flows if you want to get persnickety and do all the Schumann resonances, but you know, just take the main resonance and say, okay, we got this flow. You have the DC background flow, which I described, and for all the Schumann resonances, you've got some AC flow. It's a very complicated thing, but just for simple sake, take the DC flow. Now your body gets adjusted to that, and everything develops and lives in this from the time it's born. Always has. Now, on the other hand, when thunderclouds form and start to come over, the bottom of the thundercloud is charged in the opposite direction, usually, generally, normally, most of the time. By the way, from the electrosphere to the ionosphere, there's another charge the other way, so there's another big old energy flow going around over there. But anyway, when this thundercloud starts coming in, this energy flow that we're in starts to slow down, the DC does, and stops. And that is hellaciously uncomfortable. If you've got arthritis, as I do, every bone in your body begins to holler, and every joint and every place you've ever damaged a bone specifically raises hell. And you think you're in a mausoleum of aching joints.
See, you're here.
And when this thing comes on over then, and you're caught in reversal, remember now the flow is reversing and going back the other way. You're very uncomfortable. And then when it goes on off and the flow reverses again, you feel so beautifully refreshed. You ought to be. You just been roto-rootered. The big old plumber's friend is so everything in your body to clean out all the sludge. It's nature's way of cleaning.
Is that why that thunderstorm sparks the growth in plants to
Partly.
suddenly sprout?
There's another mechanism there, partly. But this natural flow, you see, anything which influences this environment gets into everything you do. By the way, every single charged particle in every body, in every worm, germ, paramecium, virus, human being, animal, bird, crocodile, fish, whatever, pours out his own energy flow into that. And everything, every thought, every emotion, every physical action, everything in the world is sitting right there in Gaia all the time. Everything that's ever been. Because once you form potentials, they decay. They never quite reach zero. They approach zero as close as you want, but they're always finite. And so everything that's ever been is all sitting here inside and buried up inside, comprising that huge energy flow. And one day, good Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise, we learn to put that on video screens and watch the dinosaurs run. The Russians are not far from that right now. Their torsion field theory can do part of that. I will point this out to you in case you're dealing with torsion field theory. Beware and also rejoice because of torsion field theory. They gave you 3/4 of it, but if you will notice very carefully, they didn't give you the time polarized part. That's the part they want to withhold from you. But they're going to capture almost all of the scientific community with the torsion field stuff because it's real. But it's only 3/4 of it, and they're deliberately withholding from you the most powerful 1/4 part.
You're talking about what's coming out in the papers now.
All those papers. Every damn paper they publish has been reviewed and approved by the KGB. And it's not giving away the big jewels. But they're just like chess players. They're sacrificing pawns to get the whole entire U.S. community, scientific community, headed down that road but leaving out the main part. Since they have the main part, that puts them in the driver's seat. So both rejoice at the physics and also beware of it because it's a hidden trap. It's also some great physics you can look at and actually works. And yeah, you can see through the ocean with it. You can see through the earth. You can take pictures of the inside of the earth and pictures of the bottom of the ocean. You can do that. One more question, I gotta go.
Oh, okay, good.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, we're not gonna be run out of here, but we do have limited time. My
Well,
question
let's
was,
let everybody else go that wants to go. And if anybody wants to stay, I'll stay here about 15, 20 minutes more.
that sounds great. I do have a question for you though.
Yeah.
How do alternative medicine play into this? I've seen things happen. As a matter of fact, the way I met Chris Tinsley was the story of his first wife and what happened to her, which is passing. How does that, is this all part of the same thing? The body changes the way that it works completely sometimes?
Look at a computer. I got software programs in it. I got discs coming with a lot of,
I do computers.
yeah, you know about recordings. Every piece of mass in the body is a disc. It records not signals, but little space-time curvature instants. See, in general relativity, curvature space-time affects mass, works on it. Mass or condensed energy affects and curves space-time. The two interact together. The actual space-time is active in general relativity. It's not a passive thing at all. And so everything that's happening around the mass is making little curvatures of space-time. That's what makes all the forces. And so the mass, in recording all that stuff, is recording little vacuum engines, little space-time curvatures. And so you've got, the body is continually recording all of this. Now, some of the alternative medicines, they're not medicines, like health supplements,
Yes, practice.
there are certain chemical reactions that your normal computer program functioning of your body would do. Well, if you're missing some things it needs for the program, you've got a corrupted program. So it's producing bad results, or every once in a while a bad result. And so what happens is sometimes the health supplements contain the things that are missing or can help the body make the things that's missing, and then it's able to recorrect or repurge the program. It's like cleaning a virus out of your system.
So is that the real basis for homeopathy?
Basically, that's a real crude explanation. Oh, homeopathy is great. That's pure space-time engines. You structure, it's structuring a fluid. Hydrogen bonding structuring a fluid has been in the literature now for 30, 35 years. So we don't have to prove that.
I've seen it work when I do it.
Yeah, and hydrogen, when you put mass in here, a chemical, what happens is the hydrogen bonding structures adapt to the exact compound you have. And the compound and the hydrogen structures are in interaction. After all, space-time is just a big potential, and any other potentials are changed to it. It's a curvature of space-time. All potentials are general relativistic. So, and that's not Tom Bearden, that's physics. So when I put a compound in there, I make a whole set of little vacuum engines. And T.D. Lee pointed out, we've never tried to use the vacuum engines. And he urged physicists to do it. Nobel Prize winner Lee, in his book, When Nobody Bothers. But homeopathy, what you do, you put it in there, shake it real good, so all the fluid gets exposed to it, and all the fluid makes these little structures. And these are little space-time curvature engines, so they're active little structures. And then if you can get the mass part out, you still got the vacuum engine, the space-time curvature engine. It acts on mass. That's by general relativity, it acts on mass. Now, that doesn't appear in chemistry, but it darn well appears over here in general relativity. So you can prove it by general relativity, but not by chemistry. Well, everybody's arguing it chemically. Chemically, it's not using general relativity. If you go to general relativity, it's a piece of cake to prove it. So yeah, it's real, and it's low space-time curvature engines, and that's the kind of medicine we ought to use. We shouldn't use drugs to anybody. But it takes, right now, $500 billion. That's the latest estimate. I've got a written document on this. To make one of these modern drugs now go through the FDA approval process. This excludes everything like we're talking about. Only very powerful companies with huge financial resources can even afford that. And let me tell you, you've got $500 billion investment in one drug, you're going to get your money back. And I'll tell you something else. Power corrupts, big power corrupts bigly, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And they're big power, babe. And when big power gets threatened, it's very corrupt. And they'll do you in any way they can.
Do you think they could possibly make you ill so you'd have to buy your medication?
Well, if you take enough of their drugs and you're not sick, you will be. I have to take a minimum amount of drugs. I have to take one medication for pain, for arthritis, for the joints. I take about 1/10 of what the recommended dose is. And I only take it when I absolutely have to. Because, you know, naproxen will damage your liver if you take it enough years. So what I do is I try to take it the least I can. I do have to use it. But I take all these supplements which cut it down to where I can use very little of it. So I can't do away with it. And I will use a drug if I have no other alternative. But I know when I'm using the drug, I'm not treating the illness, I'm treating the symptom. When I'm using the supplements, I'm getting partial treatment of the illness, you see. So you have to balance the two. You can't eliminate it entirely, but you have to have a happy balance. Just don't go for the drugs totally. The worst thing in the world is to be on 20 different drugs and your whole system torn apart, and they can't even figure out which way to go. And unfortunately, they do that to a lot of aging people. Yes?
This is totally away from that, but I'm not a physicist. You may have said this before, and I didn't catch it.
It's okay, no problem. I'm a country boy, started out to be a country western guitar player.
But a while ago, when we talked about the mind and time, the mind works on in time, or compared the two. Anyway, I understood what you meant there, but I wanted to know if you see the mind as being separate from the brain or the body.
Yes.
Totally?
No. The best way I can say it is if I have some data recorded on a disk, I have data plus the disk. If I take the data and pull off the recording off the disk and put it somewhere else out there, like in the whole universe, I still have the data, I just don't have the disk anymore. I don't have what we would call a functional disk with data on it. And the human body is the same way. The mind is coupled to the body, but the mind is in the time domain. All our physics, observable, the observer, remember time is not observable in physics. It strips away the time, and there went your mind. So it's left with this physical results of observation from the cupping in here, nothing else. It can't tell you what gave you the cupping because it threw away the mechanism when it threw away the mind, time-like functions of the mind. So the mind is forever. I use mind in the very general sense, both personal conscious, personal unconscious, collective unconscious of the human species, collection unconscious of the whole, all the species, which is Gaia, and go as far as you wish to. If you get to the bottom, you're going to get to God. In my view, I'm not trying to urge my view on anybody else. This is a model. But in this model, I can generate what happens to you after death. I've been close enough to that 2 times that I'm perfectly happy with what the model says because that's exactly what I experienced. It's very hopeful, but I assure you there's no death. But it's also very warning to you because if you really think you can beat your fellow man, your fellow human being, and get away with it, when you die, you'll find out you didn't get away with a damn thing. And I'll tell you what you're in when you die, in case you're wondering. You know when you go to sleep at night, how your conscious mind really sort of withdraws? It's like being on a submarine. You pull in the periscope, right, at night. You leave things around so if a sudden noise comes on, you can put the periscope up again. Well, when you die, you pull in the periscope and you can't put it up again. Okay?
That's pretty good.
So what are you in when you die? You're in your own unconscious. What do you got in there? Whatever you put in there.
Aren't you in eternity compared to time? They're completely different.
Well, there is a time domain here, but it may be a different time from the time we are talking about on Earth. Here, time is indefinite.
Eternity was the past, eternity is the future, the time is in between.
Well, it's a little different from that. But what you're really in is whatever you have created inside your own unconscious.
It's like your own bubble, your own thing, your own.
If you beat the hell out of everybody and cheated, connived, guess what you're going to be in? A waking nightmare from which you cannot wake. And I would call that hell. But I've been there, and it's hell. Now, if you want to go into that area, let me give you one little piece of advice. The hardest thing to do when you really die is to realize you're dead. You're in exactly the same state that you're in a deep dream with all this stuff you can't control coming at you every which way from the unresolved conflict in your unconscious mind. That's what you're in. So if you want to have a happy time after the death, be sure you're at peace with your fellow human being. If you've got somebody you've done dirty, go apologize to them. Put your arm around their shoulder and beg their forgiveness. I'm quite serious. You know, I'm not talking religion. I'm talking about practicality. Or you'll pay for it through the nose when you meet it in a waking nightmare you can't awake from. Because all you're dealing with is these time operations going on around you, and you have put them in there and you have made them. So yes, sir, you do reap what you sow, exactly and precisely. And that's physics. Time physics, but physics.
One quick one, Tom. Based on what you said, I think that we can reasonably conclude that the free energy devices that we're talking about can come into real.
They will be here anytime we can get by the scientific community.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you what you think the timeline is for getting free energy.
I hope 2 years.
You think that's?
That's what I heard 2 years ago.
Well,
I'm serious.
during this last 2 years, they killed several researchers.
There's no.
They stopped several programs and several people disappeared that are no longer with us.
What's to keep that from continually happening?
I don't know, except if we all
Well-
spread the word.
That's the thing, a lot of those people were doing exactly that. spreading
I can only give you my approach to that. Almost 30 years ago, right about 30 years ago, when I started in this energy field, boy, I didn't know what I was getting into. I don't know if I'd ever had the guts to tackle it if I had. But I took a different view. And I want to explain to you why I took the view I did and why it was so hard and why nobody wanted to take that view. I looked at electrodynamics. I'd had enough in nuclear engineering, and I minored in electronic engineering way back there in the old days before they even had transistors and they had the tubes. And I said, electrodynamics, at least all the electrodynamics I ever had, absolutely prohibits an over-unity device. But I have seen an over-unity device working, measured it. Now I can't argue with experimental results. So now I've got a problem. It means that the model we're using in electrodynamics is imperfect. The real thing to do is not to go out here and wave my arms and say, hey baby, it's resonance, that's all you got to do. Well hell, we've had LC resonance since Christ was a corporal and never added a single watt to the power line. So we have got to find out what went wrong with electromagnetics that we're taught in our schools. Either that, or I got to say I took leave of my senses. I didn't know how to measure. The sine wave wasn't a sine wave. The instruments was all wacky, and that thing wasn't sitting there powering 5 light bulbs. See, I couldn't do that because it did do that. It did that for years. So I had a problem. So what I said was, the real problem then is to find out what went wrong with electrodynamics. And all my cohorts was just laughing at me like hell and saying, Tom, don't worry with that. We're just going to run out here and find one of these things. We're going to produce it like sausages. Well, this sausage works different from anything they ever taught you. You'll run into a machine that'll work in Huntsville and it won't work in Athens. And it'll work in Birmingham fine. You take it out to sea and it'll blow itself up. Or it'll work on Monday and it won't work on Friday. There are different kinds of variables here than anything we've ever studied. And if we want it to work all the time, we're either going to have to be real lucky, like some of the inventors were, or we're going to have to find out what those variables are and learn to control them. So that's the tough job. So I said, well, nobody else is doing this job. I don't have really the super qualifications that ought to be brought to bear, but within my limitations, I'm going to do what I can. Well, I have developed the world's first legitimate theory of over-unity electrodynamic devices, and it's rigorous and it will hold water. And I can move it now all over into open systems far from equilibrium, so I've got now a whole body of science that will accept those results. I had to show, however, how we got it out of classical thermo, which won't, you see. And I had to find out what happened in electrodynamics, and I found out what Lorentz did to us, and that's what happened to it. They threw out those kinds of systems. So now we have, what I'm trying to do is build a bridge back to the orthodox scientist, the guy who's really good. And I can show him now, you see, look, here's what was done in the standard electrodynamics. There's nothing wrong with that, except you must realize that now is systems in equilibrium. If I take the systems out of equilibrium, which I can do, you did 2 disequilibrium shifts and carefully selected them to get one in equilibrium in the first place. I'm just going to use one. I'm going to keep it out of equilibrium. Now I move over into this other thermodynamics, which is already accepted by the physicists. I have a viable argument. I believe this argument can be sold because it holds water. If all I was going to do was tell you, all you got to do is make LC resonance and you can get it out of resonance, the physicists are going to look at me and say, you're crazy. We do that all the time. It doesn't do overunity. And they had one other question to answer. Where is the energy coming from in the circuits? It ain't coming out of battery. Battery doesn't furnish any energy to the load or anything else, neither does a generator. The Huntsville Power Company does not furnish any energy at all to any light in my house or to any of the systems in my house. What the Huntsville Power Company charges me for is to pump all the spin electrons when the free energy flowed all down the line and pump the electron forward. They pump all the spin electrons back through the generator, kill the source dipole, and they got to keep burning some more fuel to rotate the shaft a little more to form the magnetic field again, to force the charges back apart to get the energy flowing. And they're steadily killing them and steadily forcing them back apart. And I'm paying these fools to have a sumo wrestling match inside their own generator.
Thank you, Tom.
That's the end of it. Thank you.
Couple closing remarks. I'd like to thank everyone from Birmingham for coming up. I'd like to recognize a couple of people from Birmingham. Nancy Lawson, just given up the privilege of being our section director for Birmingham. And Carol Hall, who was looking forward to attempting the opportunity to see if she likes it. Those of you who know Peggy Boyd know that she's been pretty sick. And we've been passing the card around. Is anyone who has not gotten the opportunity to sign the card with Peggy?
It's good theory, by the way, everything they
I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'm sure Tom, if he has a few minutes to spend until they throw us out.
They're not going to throw us
Not that sweet.
Yeah, there is a rather violent thunderstorm, so if y'all be careful going home if you're going to take off.
It's the South.
And also, if you'd like to make a donation, we have a bowl here on fish bowl on the table. Thank you.
I have the distance I mentioned, it's all hard copy.
Thank you.
Hey, I want one of those sheets you had on the Murfreesboro. I just want to get by the go to the bathroom.
There's also some more of these that I forgot about.
What is this? Short. Oh, that's
Oh, Gaia is.
Is that the one in Tennessee?
No, Nevada. Tennessee.
Living part of all species on Earth, all the life on Earth. Everything that can survive. By the way,
Probably not. Probably go to the
Greenleaf Pubs has it. Greenleaf Pubs has it.
Are all the guests?
Where's Greenleaf?
It's in Tennessee.
It's in Tennessee, but it's on the net.
It's on the net. Just look under Greenleaf. Just do a search on Greenleaf about the beach.
Right, it's, what's his name?
Leah Haley and
they didn't do it in an inner.
I can't think of his name.
Nice book I read on Whistle's Age. How many books did you
Jeff.
I really don't know.
You got this living?
I've seen at least 3 of his books in Greenleaf publications. No, but they're on the net. They have their listings all in there all the time. Take care of yourself.
We go see it tomorrow, right?
No, ma'am, unfortunately. I can't get down there every month. But I try to come down. Okay.
I'm pretty sure birds came in with face to say, have it, but nobody can find out. When he first started lightning his bones to the ground, semi-wings, he can't fly and he can't run. Everything's wild. He's dead. So what happened? One morning, every egg that started hatching hatched into a bird instead of a rabbit. How that happens coming out of this model? Believe it or not, it falls out like directed in the But the actual species itself, it turns out, it slowly builds and slowly one day reaches one day never happened overnight. But he had, untold pioneers. One day reaches the observable and that doesn't fall out. Yeah. That was my Let me give you a magic. Let me give you a magic. I should say one of those things I know. There are those energy conservation laws in China. You think there are, Professor told you there are not. If you want the proof, go to Russian literature. They show you black and white. By the way, you want to go down the interstate today? So they want like, starts with H. Get out to that. I got to be hit by 65 translation for the drug. I can take this as the there are no constraints. 65 west, that'll straight. Take your right to I-65.
Okay, so 565 west, 65 south.
Right.
Thank you.
That is correct.
Thank you, dear. Carol? Foundation. Have you got the stuff from other guys? Where's it at? Tomorrow, you coming to the meeting?
Well, they're not exactly out of business.
Causes energy to the body,
So then everybody goes off and they say what I'm talking about, and I can't get them to read what I'm telling them to find out that really is it didn't mention it. And I took it out.
The Russian radar.
The Russians use it all the time.
Oh, okay. If you have.
So do several other nations.
It'll clear up everything. You can go up there and
Sure, all I know is you have a set of papers that will be around now for some time. Several years. Lost out 15 years ago. And I recommend very strongly to you a paper by Riddick and Blue on some source that they call it undiscovered way. That's a longitudinal way. Some good things we had in the track was the way. The original paper there was published in Foundation. There's some corrections. But it's all kind of paper. Now, that's what they close. But you have to go to these two Whitaker programs, 1903, 1904, to find out how that stuff fits together. How you make that longitudinal wave, which is got spin through graviton. And how you make it, of course, you can use graviton, but you can figure that out. And how you make all the other waves go. That's Yeah, but the balloon is constrained, so you got like you got an arrow grip this way. You gotta go to John. Yeah, so we're doing it here. Freeze all three directions. That's like a very, very stiff. Yes, you can. But you gotta do it with an influence. You can't observe it by direct operation. But you can interfere it. If you interfere twice, you'll have to cut it down to that size. Now move it.
Yeah, it's forward. See you later. Huh? Yeah, see y'all later. Bye-bye.
They answered the objection, well, you just don't do this. Also, I don't see why they don't just buy a bomb solution for it. By the way, that's not on page. Warm garden. It's only when they insist on retaining force that you can't exist for some extent. Oh, okay. You don't have that, man. It's only when they get into the army. The field in back. I got a little derivation. Arithmetic. We define, I'll use we define E field as that's the definition. Not equal sign. We're talking definition now, which is always an equation don't define equal. It tells you that magnitude of the things on the left is equal to the magnitude of the things on the right. Well, he was one of the things that proposed but now the energy is something different. That's the definition. Okay.
Feel free to give me a call anytime.
It's also defined.
They start out with 17. Well, got to quit it. What they're doing is trying to find gold. They had to.
What's this you're talking about? How do we know when you did it?
He just don't read. He just don't do electronic machinery to verify.
Okay?
Well,
If something happened like that, would we observe it? Would we know? No way to know. You don't know.
But if they
but since it really makes no difference to the scientific world, because you got the if I had 1,000 people stand up and verify,
I gotta go to the bathroom.
even though it's not research.
Well, I don't know how you're gonna get out of here.
Any reason for doing it?
All right.
It's cold. What?
When I had the meeting, this was before I finished the thing on light beam. I had a couple others.
Stop time, so I could already drive, except he stopped all the time.
And we all have to go all the time.
In something you can do in a laboratory or something, you can stop all the time?
Well, you can't stop time.
If you go back when they didn't have the electron, they didn't have the
Everybody else is here.
like a cubic controller fluid.
Each time.
I think, and I'm trying to figure out, because somebody said,
Really?
are you with this one?
No, I just come with a friend here. He told me about it.
Okay, did you come with a friend of yours to,
You know Jack Snavely over there?
remote
He's the
viewing?
one.
Did you go to the remote viewing? I just, I was trying to.
Maybe I look like somebody else.
That's one of those things, isn't it? Like she said, in your dreams.
Know somebody else, some student in school over here says, you look like some professor.
You need to get out. Yes, it was, you need some assistance. Yeah, hold my hand. Yeah, it didn't take us a minute or two to get up here. It wasn't quick. We'll just clear the streams.
So what I did is expansion manufacturing. But with a slight
So it's basically the same.
in other words, if you
Turns out.
It's a general relativity world. What, the only disturbance is space-time.
I did, but it didn't go
That's
off.
what an electromagnetic wave is. Not a big field, none.
Stop, pause, edit. Audio.
You're 10 to the 40th time what those guys are chasing the general relativity. Or it would be along the line, it's expansion and rarefaction. It's like a balloon blowing up and contracting. That's all it is.
Thank you.
You have a computer.
Well,
Everybody's watching.
No, it won't go, I won't put that part on the tape anyway. I'll stop it before that. I just want to erase that tape. It's ready.
Wave actually carries angular momentum.
So the rate of pulse being like this, the width of the pulse being.
That's a gross arrow. That's a gross arrow.
The time
So
between
when this almost longitudinal wave, with this tiny little difference, tiny little phase comes in. That's exactly the phase difference between the groove electron and so the first half interacts with the electrons, the second half decouples and interacts with the positive charges and gives you equal square numbers. They don't even count. The electrons that cause a rollout, one half of every damn reception experiment and every damn transmission experiment in the experiment. And they'll all agree that it causes happen. And I said to one of them one day, I said, let's put these together, sir. I'm a dummy, I just come in. I've got this wire here and I'm going to receive it. Every time this disturbance, whatever it is, comes in here, I get two things in here. I get the groove electron gas disturbed and I get the nuclei. He said, that's right. I said, now if the disturbance doesn't come, neither one of those happens. That's right. I said, how can you cause the disturbance of the electron caused by that disturbance? But the disturbance of the protons are not. When they will react to the same thing. If you're using a field or whatever, you've thrown away half. Oh no, that's the third law. No, that's in the half. I couldn't get it to understand. If it happens, it happens. It's a law. So they throw away half the energy. Half the electron and half the money. This is what I meant when I say, well, that all comes from those tight strings, you see, that Larry was saying, actually, it's tugging. There's nothing more back to it than the it's just always been that way since 1864. Well, they assume that there is a mighty demon, a mystical demon, present in every experiment, which is waiting and watching and carefully measuring what those electrons do, and waiting for it carefully to take its time and everything, and kicking the hell out of those photons to make it work. Well, goodness gracious, that's mystical. That's right, that's mystical.
Well, you know, this is the deal. To me, I don't think
well, Lorenz is the one that did it. This is the real he published a book in 1870. He died when he was about 6 years back. Yeah, he came along later, and he took those equations. You don't read so that see, heavy side is already heavy side has the equation. The upside down. Rinse came in and changed those. And everybody since then have been using rinse symmetrical regauging of the particular potential.
You ever skywatch?
Well, when you do symmetrical regauging, the system is so you have something to set a system.
Probably has access to it.
Never can go over.
The problem with it is,
They changed legal ones. Give calls of anything, it's being off track.
well, you know, if you think of our intent,
It's a descriptive side.
you want to write a statistical. You ever want to get statistical theory, take the population outside, they work with it.
Well, you see, right now, already, the unfinished, by the way, publishing.
Yeah, we should carry, like I said, carry a camera.
And the reason it's missing the scale, it's missing the hidden order. And the reason it's missing the hidden order is they adopt and give thermodynamic statistics based on random variation. All they're saying is the statistics itself has to be well, they won't do that. They continue to use the same statistics, which will reduce chaos. And they'll say, we got a problem because we're missing the hidden order, and we don't know what to do. It's just like a dog chasing a dog.
I've got several knobs on it. And next to it's got a black reaction place where with your hand over it.
No, every side
turn the first knob until you feel
self-taught.
turn the second.
He got a hold of it. He's teaching himself.
Once you have all these set,
Brilliant guy.
you get up and it tells you.
Well, he made it. Every side was
And then it tells you where to set it to, and then it oscillates.
I went to work as a young lad, and he was bright enough.
When I saw that, I immediately thought,
And he's brought up and thinking the wrong thing. He was totally clueless. And what he would do is he would start working out all these. He was working his way to that knowledge, but he was teaching himself calculus, different equations, maximum. And it blew his mind. He spent 2 years studying. He's probably one of the few people that ever said.
Well, just because you got unmarked telephone, even black
And Maxwell became a guy hero. He couldn't understand.
You gotta remember.
So he said, you know, he almost got it right, but it's the forces that cause it. Potential, they not even real. That's mystical mobile
Everybody else.
But when his reinterpretation threw out all the potential of Maxwell, he could. He had to keep the A and B. He couldn't get rid of this. But he threw away all the rest of it. Of course. See, in those days, everybody.
So, you know, just because you see a black and
Maxwell said it's the real thing.
we've run into some of the
Because in their mind, their leader was there, and so they didn't have forces here. Forces in the
again, there's an awful lot of hype and an awful lot of stuff.
But late 1800s, Michael Riddick blew away the material. They never changed it.
It's fascinating subject.
They kept the material. Everything is still teaching. 110 years.
But come to the meeting and we'll
spiritual.
I have to get out here.
Yes, I know. I know.
Yeah, same
we used to catch them all.
Thank you.
Now,
I'm not saying there's.
I need to get you to move out of this. There is a phenomenon which is happening, which can bear that resemblance very close. And we believe that long enough, we created the stuff ourselves. We created what's called tools, material. Yes, we do have critical, but they didn't come here from some of the those that we created. We used to call them devils, nymphs, and fairies, and Loch Ness monsters, and Sasquatches, and things like that. But you see, if we deal with the time dose, it's condensed energy. It has the same energy density as mass. You can materialize a living, breathing being right out of thought. Now, I was in a completely unplanned experiment where we materialized living, breathing creatures. I didn't like what we got. But we did do it, and we did it. I understand how we did it. No, don't believe everything you read about and so I know it can be done because we did it. Now, we didn't plan to do it. We didn't sit down and draw up a plan and experiment to do it. But we went back after this crazy series of things happened. We messed up the time in the whole area for 4 days. And we went back all the clocks, mechanical fingers, watches, electric clocks, everything went completely localized. But then what we did is we went back and we said, let's put together we believe in real phenomena. There's a mechanism that we look for. Damn what we got. Well, what we got had a mechanism. And we've been using that mechanism, didn't know it. Interferometry, we were using big interferometry. We had 2 big scales at the time. We didn't know more. And we were going to stop the experiment today. We've been doing a couple hours, 3 hours in the morning. And we're going to socialize at 5 and all that. Well, we got busy. We didn't turn off the generator.
Just want to visit.
So we had all that shooting conversations about the black stuff. We got these time density forms sitting there in the mind. We got time density generators for like hell. And we're providing input. So they're very
Is that what you're doing?
Yes, 9 meters.